Okay, good morning. Hemshech Tzadik Daled, page 161. So we entered now after the Frierdiker Rebbe explaining in more detail what the Rebbe Rashab explained in Ayin Beis on page 1158 on volume 2. The third type, the third oifen or level of bittul of the oir in the Ayin Amiti, the Ayin of the Esh Amiti. And that third level is what he calls Efes Biltecha. That means that there's no mitzias of Ur. The whole only thing we see is Atzmus. In other words, it's Atzmus expression. As opposed to level 2, or the second, which there's a mitzias. Ein Zuloscha. There's an existence of Ur, but the existence is completely dependent on its source. So he now asks the question, what's the difference between these two? It's really a double question when you really think about it. What is the difference between 2 and 3? Because number 3, you also have to say there's a mitzias. If there's no mitzias, they can't talk about bittul. In the words that he says, you have to say something is bottle. So what's the difference between that something in type 3 and the something in type 2? They both are due to the dveikus and attachment and awareness of their source. In type 2, we said the earth can't exist without the source, so therefore the source is its entire essence of its being. And in level 3, we also say there's bittul. So you have to say there's a mitzvah. So what's the difference between 2 and 3? As he calls it, compared to lahabitl be'efin habeis. But then he takes it even further. The question goes also, what's then the difference between level 3 and atzmus? Since you're saying these words, that the only thing you have, yesh rak b'chinas ha'atzmus, there's no mitzias at all of ur. It's only atzmus. So what's the difference between the third level in the bittul of ur, which is only atzmus, and the kol atzmus? As he puts it. These are his words, the Frierdiker Rebbe's words. What's the difference in the chelik of atzmus that's expressing atzmus in this third level of ur? And here's where he distinguishes between level 2 and 3. He says level 2, you could say, is like siba mesubov, cause and effect. So though the effect is completely result of the cause, but there is an effect. There's something there, as he calls it, siba mesubov. So b'tzad echad misyaches al asiba, lefi shaluli asiba, without the cause, it would not be. There is some effect. So what is the bittul there? That this cause, the effect feels margish as sibase. So therefore, in this level 2, since the entire effect is only a result of the cause, so therefore its entire existence is the cause that causes it this effect and brings it into reality. But the third level is a chelik min ha'atzmus, as he calls it. Pirush, shegam min ha'atzmus lo yesh rak ha'atzmus. That this oir, there is no mitzias, you can't even call it an effect, you could only call it an expression of atzmus. So hine l'chere eine muvan, but men nechlek mitzias zeh ha'botl me'eseh mitzias kula shu botl love. So then the case, what's the difference between the things, since it's only atzmos, what's the difference between this level of eir, which is only about atzmos, there's nothing of its own at all, and the thing is bottled too, which is atzmos. That's the question. So now, the Acha Inyan, we began to learn, and I'll review this again. He's going to explain this now with something we learned earlier, that oir, and he's going to explain that these 3 levels, Mitzias, Kiyum, Vigili, the existence of Ur, meaning the very being. Mitzias here doesn't mean, we'll learn later, does not mean substance. It means that the very concept, the very fact that exists, that's Metzias. That's going to be the highest level that God wants He wants the concept of Gilui, the concept of a Metzias Nimtza. Kiyum is the perpetuation of its value, which is going to be a next level. That's going to be like the Ayin Beis of Ayin Gimel is Metzias. Kiyum is going to be the second Ayin, which is Ein Zoloscha. And the third, the way the Eiros are in Kalim, Gili, as they're actually a functional revelation, not just the concept of Eir. That's going to be the first Eifin of Bittul, which is that's not Tefes Mokim. That it exists, but it's nullified in the presence of its source. So he's going to explain this now at length. And that's where we stopped. That there's the three Metzias or Eir Kameshu Kol Adayim Ba'amoyer. So Metzias is the way the Eir is still encompassed in the Moyer, meaning it's really just the power of the Moyer, of the source, to express, to create a consciousness, to create an awareness, to create revelation. But remember, it's not yet a functional one. It's still in the Moyer. And from that, he says, will come the two other levels, Kiyum and Gili. What he's going to explain soon, that these are the three levels. And then he's going to explain with that the difference between Atzmus and Metzias HaEir, meaning the highest level where only Atzmus dominates, and the difference between the third level and the second level of Eir, with this, what he's going to explain now. So this is going to be a slow development over the next few pages, and that's where we'll start now, Ubira Inyan Hu. So at the bottom, 6 lines from the bottom on page 161 in Ayin Beis. Okay. Does anyone have any questions on what we learned so far? Obviously, this is just beginning to explain it, so if your question is, what's the answer? He didn't give us the full answer yet. But if you have anything that needs clarity up till here, if anybody wants to comment or question anything, feel free. If not, we'll just continue on here. Okay. Ubir Inyan, and the explanation of this Inyan, who Dihini Yedua, it is known, she has Gimel Madregas Be'eris. There's 3 levels in the lights. It doesn't just say Be'er, Be'eres, because he's talking about all the different revelations. 3 levels. I pointed out yesterday that this is discussed in chapter 29 in volume 1, and in the Maimer Dvarim, which I said was chapter, what chapter that was, 300 or something. I said it yesterday. Yeah, 279. So 3 levels in Eir. In Eires. Madrega ha'alef, the first level. Heina Eiris k'moshein klulim be'erein sev baruch hu. This is Eir, revelation or awareness or gilui, the way it's encompassed in the infinite divine light. Shalifnei tzimtzum, pre-tzimtzum. So we learned a lot about this earlier, so he's bringing us back there. No, but pre-tzimtzum, you're not talking about there's no existence yet. Everything is within the divine energy, if you wish, divine field of energy. So the Eir, as it's encompassed in Eir Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum. The Hein, there's a name they have. Ha'eses spheres hagnuzes b'maitzilon. These are the 10 hidden spheres b'maitzilon within the emanator, within this, the one that emanated them, Matzilon. Not Maitzilon, the one who emanated. Now you see the word here, Dafka is Atzilon, doesn't say bara, creation, because at this stage we're talking about an emanation, which is a imparting, an extension of. In other words, it's not a creation yesh ma'ayin, because all it is a revelation of its source. So it's true, the Atzmus is built in Metzias Nimtza, and beyond anything, and any definition and any revelation, but the Eir is a reflection of Atzmus. As much as it doesn't tell us about Atzmus, it's still nothing but godliness. The Eir doesn't have anything else. So The way it is, Lifnei Tzimtzum, it's all encompassed, and it's called the 10 hidden spheres. You may recall, in volume 1, very many years ago, probably 8 years ago when we learned it, so he explained at length, and I can tell you what chapter. He says, why is it called Esses Spheres? If there's nothing that exists there, why do we call it Esses Spheres Hagnuzis? So the truth is, it's not really spheres. It's God's capacity, or you can say how God envisions the spheres. Chassidus gives different examples for it, which we learned throughout Ayin Beis. It began all the way, when he first discussed it, was back in just telling you where it is in case you want to look it up. Basically, chapter, let's see where he starts, 13 maybe. Actually, 15, chapter 15 and on. Yeah. But specifically, chapter 21, that's what I wanted to refer to, where he talks about what is this thing, Esses Spheres Hagnuzis. You may also recall earlier in volume 2, when we talked about Kamayim Aponim Laponim, he talked about the Esses Spheres Hagnuzis either as Shemis, these are like names. But just for the record, the easiest way to understand them, it's Spheres HaGluyos, the 10 revealed spheres, which we'll soon discuss in Atzilus, is 10 attributes, Chesed, Gvura, Chochma, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvura, Teferes, Netzach, Chod, Yesod, Malchus. There's a structure. It's Ruchnius. It's not physical yet, like the faculties in the human being, which enter into this world. But there's a structure. It's called Adam Elyon. Lifnei Tzimtzum, you can't talk about structure. You can talk about God envisioning things, so-called in the divine consciousness. So we learned, if you remember, that there's a state before there's a Ratzon, there's even a consideration, then there's a consideration, and then there's deliberation, there's determination. Then God envisions the details, and then Shir Atzmei Ratzon HaKodem, Shir Atzmei B'Koyach, where he allocates resources. It's all like the artist envisioning one piece of art, the 10 spheres, among the infinite possibilities. That's the best way to express what he says in Ayin Beis about Esses Spheres Hagnuzis. So in this case, the Eiris we're talking about is how the Eiris are all included, encompassed within, let's call it the artist, how he's envisioning it. There's no art yet. That's level 1. The Eiris HaKlulim, as he said, Lifnei Tzimtzum, these are called the 10 hidden spheres. Dal Zeh Amar, on this we say in Pasuk Eliyahu from Tikkun Zayar, Antu Chad, you are one. The Pirush Chad, what means one? Hu b'chinas Yochid be'etzem. Because you could say one, there's Echad, there's a lot of levels in oneness. But here he's talking about Yochid be'etzem, meaning unique, exclusive, fundamentally different than everything else. Not an Echad that relates and says, there's a heaven and earth, Ches and Dalet, 7 heavens, 1 earth, 4 directions, and God's unity permeates it all. In other words, the unity within existence. He's talking here, Chad Be'etzem, a type of unique exclusivity that is only about, there's only nothing else but God. V'hainu, what does this mean? The Esses Spheres Hagnuzis hem miyuchodes mamish be'erein sof. The 10 hidden spheres are not yet demonstrable and palpable or defined entities. It's all completely united and one with Erein Sof. Which means, to use the example, it's all as the artist is envisioning the 10 spheres, using that example. And a second aspect to this, number one, it's all miyuchadis with Erein Sof, and also the 10 spheres themselves. Not just they're all encompassed in the source of the 10 spheres, but they are also all b'tachlis hayichud, all as one. In other words, there's no distinguishable structure yet. Again, like the artist is envisioning all the art, the entire art, but all as one picture. So b'tachlis hayichud mamish. Ukiyadua hefresh, as it's known, the difference between echad li yachid. So there's two expressions. We say, Mashal Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem echad. God is one. Yachid is what he's referring to, means unique. Yachid means the only one. Not one, but the only one. Yachid, one alone. The echad, who is sachdus hapratim. When you say echad, that's the unification and the unity of details. Like saying there are many things, but they come together as one. V'hainu, page 162. Hainu mashanasa echad la'achar shekvan nizgalu v'hoye pratim nivdalim. In other words, echad is referring once is becoming one after it already got revealed, and there were separate details. There was diversity. So echad is like gathering it all together and recognizing the unity amidst this diversity. The pratim nivdalim means separate details. V'achrei came. After you have the separate details, afterwards, chezim v'nechlalim b'mekeiron. They then return and become encompassed in their source. Hine kishachezim misachdim. When they return to and become one with their source, hine sachdu zu hirak sachdu saprotim levad. This unity is only considered to be a unity of details. V'nikra b'shem hatoyar echad. And this is called with the descriptive name echad, oneness. So basically, one is essentially the harmony or the unification of many details. So like God created a world, the world is a multitude of details. And then when we're ma'achad Hashem, we say all these details is really created by one God. So essentially, you're looking at the details and you're seeing them all connected to oneness. In the human level, let's say you have many things you're doing, a project that has many details. So the leader of the project, the director of the project, or the conductor takes all the details and shows and coordinates them that they all are part of one picture. What about Yachid? Avla Atoyar Yachid, the descriptive word Yachid, the description Atoyar, the name, the title Yachid, who shemiyuchad be'etzem mamish. It's not about details. It's that this entity is miyuchad be'etzem, fundamentally unique and different than anything else. And he's going to give an example. V'yuvan zeh al derech moshel mekayach hatnua. We'll understand this with, for example, the power of movement. So among the different faculties that human being has, one of them is movement. You can walk, you can move your hands. The fact that you can move. So he says, "Dihine b'chol keich mekeich zanefesh." The kol keich mekeich zanefesh. Every faculty from the faculties of the soul. Hari yesha keich hakloli. There's the keich hakloli. Shahu hahiyuli. In other words, before the keich becomes a specific functional detail, it's in the state of a keich klali, a general faculty, heyuli. You may recall a little while earlier, we learned in Tzadik Dalet, the different levels of keiches. The keich goli, keich nalamim, and the keich heyuli, ha'atzmi. That's where he was discussing, where was that discussed? What was the context there? I'm just trying to remember what was the context.
The muscle of the coal and this flintstone. We're talking there. Kohu Atmi and the two levels of Gilui.
What was that? Why was that relevant? Oh, that was in order to explain the difference between Rotzen. Right, he was explaining the difference between Oyer and Yesh. Right, yeah. I think that's what he was explaining. Right.
Yeah.
that it's not b'derech richuk, right? That discussion. That oir, even though they're all infinite from the nefesh, but rotzen, right, it's not b'derech richuk. And there he spoke about the two, oir yosher and oir chezer, yeah. The questions that reach the etzem, and the rotzen that comes when you force it, you compel it. So that reaches a deeper level. So rotzen is different than, yeah. Okay, fine, good. Okay, so koyach haklali. So there's the koyach haklali, which is heyuli. Heyuli is a word that basically means potential. It's not the actualization; it's the potential state, the capacity, or the potential is better than capacity. Yechelis would be capacity. Uboy. So every koyach has the koyach klali. In other words, like we speak, let's say the koyach hariyah, the power to see. So before it actually manifests in the eye and you actually see something, there's the koyach klali, which is the power to see, the potential power to see. And then he says, oh boy, in that potential state, that general potential state, there's koyches pratim, koyches pratim klalim. Okay. There's koyches pratim klalim, he means there's specific faculties that are in a state of klalim. Let's see what that means. Hainu the kol koyach haprati kel kama pratim shem gamken koyches ruchni madayim. Okay. I think I translated, I explained it the wrong way. I think what he's saying is that all the koyches are nefesh, there's the koyach, kol koyach mekoyach nefesh, yesh koyach hakloli shoy yuli. To me, that sounded that each faculty has its general potential faculty. Now it seems like he's saying, uboy koyches pratim klolim. Within that, there's specific faculties that are still in the general state because every specific faculty encompasses more details, which are still in a state of sublime and ethereal state. Let me read it and then we'll explain. But now they're already specifics, literally specifics. So I'm not sure whether he's saying that there's one koyach, there's a general all-encompassing faculty where all other faculties come from there. And those faculties that come are specific, but they're still klolim. And then they break down further. Or is he saying that each faculty has a koyach klali hiyuli, then a koyach klali of that particular faculty? I'm not clear what he's saying, to be honest. First it sounded one way to me, now it sounds differently. So if you don't mind, I'm going to read on. Let's see how he explains it in koyach hatanua, and it may help us go back to this abstract distinction he's making. So we'll get back to it shortly. I'm not sure what the full meaning of this is, what he's talking about. Earlier, it was koyches hiyulim ha'atzmim. Then comes koyches nalamim and koyches gluyim. Now what is he saying? Okay, let's read how it is in koyach hatanua, and we'll come back to this. Ashekenu gam b'koyach hatanua. What we just said, that there's different levels in the faculties, so is it regarding the power of movement. Shu koyach klali. It's a koyach klali because movement can be many different ways. It's in general the ability for something that's alive to move. Everything that's alive is mobile, moves. That's the definition of life. It's a moving entity. This doesn't mean it has to be moving all the time, but it means it's fundamentally a state of movement. So now he's saying, I'll call hamine tenuas shenis u'mishunas. Okay. So we talk about koyach hatanua, general koyach hatanua, that anything that's chai, whether it's a human being or an animal, is misnaneya, moves. He says that's a general potential state of every davar chai, every living entity. I'll call mini hatanua sheinish mishunas. It's not telling you what specific movement. Are you moving a finger? Are you moving a a leg? Are you moving an arm? Are you moving your eyebrows? Or whatever it may be. It's a general statement, a general potential state, al kol aminei tenuas, which encompasses and includes every form of movement, sheinus and meshunas, every possible form of movement. Sheinus and meshunas means actually regular and strange, but here sheinus and meshunas really means all types of movements. Hein bekamos, hein be'echus, both in quantity, moving something, a lot of movement, and hein be'echus, qualitative movement. So it's everything included in this koyach hiyuli of tenua. V'yadua, and it's known, the kol hiyuli hu mushlo mikol hagiluyim sheboim imenu. Every potential state is mushlo, is negated from all the revelations that come from it. What this means is, hiyuli is not just like a treasure chest of resources that's concealed. You open it up and here are the resources. Hiyuli is a qualitatively different state than actuality. Hiyuli is a potential power, a power of the potential. Like, for example, if you say the koyach hiyuli you have of lifting weight. So in actuality, you can only lift, let's say, 100 pounds. But your koyach hiyuli has a lot more capacity, but it's not actualized. It's in a state of potential. So that's why he says it's muslul, the kol hagilum shebam menu. It's not potential as in, okay, here it is, and now, like a potential, let's say you have a lot of water in a reservoir, and now you draw from it. The hiyuli and the actual are removed from one another. That's what he's saying right now. Hiyuli coming into us, okay. So this state of hiyuli is that potential state. V'yesh keiches pratim klolim. Now he says, from there comes the keiches pratim klolim, meaning the specific faculties that are still in a general state. Shemehem boim hakeiches pratim lifil elasis eisen atnuas bekana ifanim v'tziyurim shenim. Okay, keiches pratim klolim, I understand from this to mean that now from the hiyuli, which is the general thing that a chai, a living thing, moves, now we talk about, okay, what kind of movement? So he says, keiches pratim klolim would be, let's say, the movement you can walk and run. You can use your arms. You can move your face, your head. So now we're talking general movements, the general faculties of movement, without specifics yet, but now at least we're talking keiches pratim klolim. There's some specific thing, the movement of your legs, for example. And from that will come the specific, when you actually move the leg in different ways, lifel lases eisen atuas bekame fanim v'tziyurim shenim. That then is I'm just using an example, the movement of the leg, to affect and implement those movements in different manners and in different shapes and forms. The kol tenua, every movement, hutzir prati meshuna mezulase. Every movement is in a tzir prati, is in a particular form or shape. Meshuna, different from another. I'm going to explain it all, but let's read it inside. Uba mekeiach hatenu haprati sheba mekeiach hatenu haklali. And it comes from the specific movement of that particular general category movement, which comes sheba mekeiach hatenu haklali shebechelik hahu shebechlolos. Which comes from the general force of the general power of movement, in that part of the human being. So before we continue on, which is probably going to explain it, this is what it sounds like to me. That the first thing is a human being, or chai, I should say, every living entity, organism, has koyach hatenua, is misnaneya. The power to move as soon as a living organism is born, or for that matter conceived, it becomes a moving entity. But that's a very general statement. It doesn't tell you specific movements in any given way. In the movement itself, that koyach hiyuli, which is a koyach klali, completely removed from any details, now comes general categories of movement. Movement of the arms, movement of the legs, movement of other parts of the body. Just using that example. Within that, once you move the legs, there's many ways to move the legs. You can run quickly, you can run slowly. You can use your fingers to write an aleph, you can use your fingers to write a beis. You can paint paintings. So you see, movement itself starts with a very general that you're a moving entity. That's step one. Then the moving entity has chalokim throughout, let's say, the body, the organism that move. And then within that, there's the specific tzir prati that you're specifically moving. So it goes in that order from koyach hiyuli to koyach klali prati to koyach prati and tzir prati. Now remember, all this, he's coming to explain what Yachid and Echad, which is all going back to Esses Sfir Sagnuz, is the first level of Eir HaKlulin. Eir HaKlulin Lifnei HaTzimtzum. The truth is, I think he's already moving now into the 3 levels. I'm not sure. We'll see where it goes. So now he continues and says the following. Shebechlaluse mischalik begimel chelkei haguf. When we say the chalokim, we're talking about, okay, you say there's the hiyuli, then there's the hiyuli that comes, let's go the other way around. There's the tzir prati, which comes from the keich hatnuah haprati sheba mekeich hatnuah haklali, that comes from the general power of movement. Shebechelek hahu, in that part of the being. And in general, the parts of the organism divide into 3 parts of the body: reish, guf, v'regel. The head, the body, and the legs. Shehem keiches pratim klolim. That's keiches pratim klolim. They're not the hiyuli. The hiyuli is the state that the living organism is a moving entity. Its capacity to move, its potential to move. That in turn comes pratim klolim, the 3 general parts of the body that move: the head, the reish, guf, regel. That he calls keiches pratim klolim. Why is it pratim klolim? Because they're still general compared to the specific use of the head, the body, and the legs. But they're pratim compared to the hiyuli, because the hiyuli is all movement. Shebechelik hareish, in the part that's the head, hatnua bekritzas einov, kmitas mitzchay, akimas svosov, netias reishi anova ano. He's breaking down what the head has many ways it can move. Kritzas einov means squinting the eyes. Kmitas mitzchay means furrowing your brow, your forehead. Akimas svosov means moving your lips. Netias reishe means moving your head, nodding or like this, whatever it means. Netias reishe, leaning or inclinations of your head. Anova ano, back and anova, this way or that way. So right here you see in the reish you have tenua, many different types. You can squint your eyes, you can furrow your brow like that, and the other things that he says. That's in the reish. Ubechelek haguf, the second part of the body is the body itself. There too, hatenua b'chol ha'evarim b'chlal. You have the movement of the general, all the evarim in general, all the organs, or the limbs, I should say. Ubeyodav b'frat, and specifically in the arms, the hands. Bekama pratim shenim, in many different detailed ways. So the body itself, all parts of the body can move, but specifically the hands are, of course, are maybe the most moving part of a human being because you use our hands in so many different ways. And b'pratim shenim, it breaks down to all kinds of different details. And he's giving also examples here. Hagbos, masakalo, ikfeda, lifting a light or heavy weight. ksiva, writing, vitziyur, drawing, v'chol avedis malacha u'poil, and all work, all craftsmanship and different types of work. You're not spelling it out, but it could be anything. Any way you use your hands, it seems to be hands here, but it could be the body in general. There's many ways. You could use hands to shape a pot, to blow glass. I mean, hands are used for so many things. A tailor, he doesn't say all this, I'm just mentioning. So he's going here from the hiyuli, the general movement, breaks down to, he's talking the kloli proti is the chalokim of the guf, head, body, and leg, and each one of them has specific forms of movement. Now he's going to the regel. Uberegel, the third part of the body, which is the legs, tenua sahiluch, the movement of walking, rikud, dancing, kfitze, jumping. The dilug is even a bigger jump. It says usually the kfitze is when you jump one leg, like hop, one leg. Dilug is usually two legs. When you, for example, the difference between a sprint and a real run. So he said walking, dancing, jumping, and leaping, you can say. Shekol tenua, the expression is mekapetz ala gvois, medalig ala harim, mekapetz ala gvois. So there's different forms of, once it says in some places that dilug is with one leg, kfitze is, I think, one leg, and dilug two legs, or sometimes the other way around. Anyway, so he gave now examples, interesting examples of movement in all three parts of the general body, the head, the body, and the leg. And now he says, the shekol tenua, every movement that were described here, every specific movement, let's say walking, or drawing the finger with the hands, or moving your, squinting your eyes, all of them are a detail in what? It's an extension of the kayach, of this particular faculty of movement, the specific movement, kayach, hatnu shebechelek hahu, from the general movement of that part of the body, ha'isa siyurei tenua be'efanim shenim u'mishunim, that creates the different shapes of movement in all different manners. Shenim mishunim means all different manners. One way, all ways. V'hainu, this means shalafitzedech avaydose upulose ba'apel ahu. That how do you determine what movement is done? It's all commensurate to what the purpose is, what your objective is. The movement is coming to achieve the objective of the Aveda and the action, whatever activity we're addressing here. In this manner, so for example, if you need to get somewhere very quickly, you need to run. So that running defines, that need to get there quickly defines that you're going to need to use your legs. In what way? Running quickly. So it defines which koyach will be used. So it says, Lufi, like he says here. Hine be'efen kazeh, based on this efen. Yegili haispashtus hakeyach mekeyach hatanua. According to whatever objective, whatever the work needs to be done, whatever the goal is, that'll cause the gili, the revealing an extension of the faculty that is moving from the keich hatanush b'shvil lifel elasis aveda v'apel. In order to accomplish and to fulfill the aveda, the work and the poil and the act and the action and the activity. And that work and that activity. So whatever the work and activity is, according to that, you draw out from the koyach kloli prati in that part of the body into the specific faculty in all its details and in its particular shape and form. I just gave one example. If, for example, you're a craftsman and you're a carpenter, you need to build furniture, So then that koyach hatnua, how you will move your arms in building the woodwork, will be based on what the objective is. Someone wants a bookcase, or they want to have a table or a chair. So the koyach tenua prati will draw from the koyach tenua klali in this and give it shape and form in order to implement what it is that you want to accomplish. I know it seems like a very exhaustive, detailed explanation, but I'm sure it's going to help us understand everything we need to understand. So just let's bear with, see where he's leading us to here. Yeah. The behechlech hadover, Friedrich Rebbe continues. You must say, behechlech hadover, this compels us. You have to say this reality. You have to say, shebekoyach hatnua, shebechelik echad, mechelke aguf, that the power of movement in one part of the parts of the body, like we said, the head, the body, or the legs, hinigam hu yischalik lechlokim rabim. So even when you're talking about one type of movement, let's say dance with your legs, or drawing with your fingers, with your hands, or the movement of your head, he says you have to say that in each specific part, that also breaks down l'chalokim rabim to many different parts, b'tenua shehem tsiyurim shenim, in movements that are in different shapes and forms. And he's going to explain, ukamay b'ksiva, like when you write, in writing, the capacity, the koyach to write, the movement that brings one to write. Hari ena dema tenua b'kosvei eis echad, it's not similar, you cannot compare the movement when you write one letter, the commercial case of Ayin Beis. I'm sorry, Ayin Aleph, not one letter. The way you write letter Aleph, when the way you write letter Beis. So even in writing itself, which is a specific faculty that is part of the koyach klali in the part of the body called the hands, that too breaks down into detail, because even writing letter Aleph requires a different type of movement than writing letter Beis. It's a different shape. Shekol tmuna hutzir tenua acheres. Every image, meaning every picture here, in this case, every structure of the letters is a tzir tenua acheres, is a different type of movement and shape. When you use a pen or a pencil or ink, quill, to draw, so when you make an aleph, it goes in one direction, because the aleph compels you to make an aleph like this. A beis is like that. And the same thing, each letter requires different movements in order to create the shape of that particular image. Yeah. V'cheinu b'chol dover shal peil v'aveda, and the same is with every action, every product, and v'aveda and work. Shaba b'tziyurei tenua shenim, shaba b'tziyurei tenua shenim, that comes in different moving shapes. They're all in this same way. They all break down into specific details, which can be traced back to more general, to even more general, to the arms, to the general movement of the koyach hayuli of the human being in general. So that's what's been explaining here, how this koyach klali called hayuli is protim klolim, which is the general faculties that are now specific, but they're still general. They in two break down further, and it continues to break down all the way to when you write a letter aleph, there's movement, which is connected to the movement of your finger of writing, connected to the movement of your fingers and your body, which is connected to the movement or draws from the, it's actually not just connected, it draws from the movement of the general movement that a human being chai, that a living thing moves. Clearly he's talking about a human being here because he's using writing, dancing, even though animals can also dance, but writing, okay. And all these movements, Even though each one of them comes from the specific power of movement, like in this case, writing a letter Aleph comes from the movement of the fingers of writing, the power of movement in writing in general. Nevertheless, they originate and are drawn from the koyach hatanua klali, the general power of movement. In other words, God forbid, for example, if a person did not have the general use of their arms, there wouldn't be the specific use. So it's not just that the letter Aleph is traced to the power to write, it traces itself to the koyach klali for your arms to move, which of course traces back to the power of your body to move, traces back to the koyach chayil, the general ability to move. That's what he's explaining now. So in other words, it all originates from the higher states. Even though they specifically, obviously the writing the letter Aleph comes from power of writing, you have to say it comes from the general power of movement. Oh, he's tracing it all the way back to the original Keicheyuli. Liyes being that a living entity moves. If God forbid, I don't want to say the word corpse, but if the person was not alive, you definitely can't write an Aleph and a Beis. So everything traces itself back to the original thing that you are a moving entity. And as a moving entity, that moving entity will then in turn inform and empower the movement of different parts of the body, which in turn will, the Reish, Regel, and Guf, Reish, Guf, and Regel, which in turn will empower the different aspects of each one of them, as we said, which will in turn define and inform the specific detail down to a letter Aleph or Beis. And the same thing with all Malacha, with all Poel and Aved, as he said. And this the fact that a living entity is not necessarily moving, that it's just created as a potential movement, meaning it's a fundamentally moving entity, not yet even defined by the specifics. Remember, a stone, for example, is not just that it doesn't move, it doesn't have the capacity to move. It's just not the nature of a daimon. Chai misnaneya. Chai is created as a moving entity. There are times it doesn't move, but it's a moving entity. So everything traces back to that koyach chiyuli, which is the koyach chiyuli al kol minei. It's the potential power of movement on all ways of movement, beifanim, different methods, and tsiyurim shem, and different shapes, u'mishunim. Shenim mishunim is a word that just encompasses every possible type of movement. But its actual implementation, that comes through the particular faculties. In other words, if you only had the koyach hayuli, hamisnaneya, the chai, and you didn't have, God forbid, a body parts, and hands and arms and a head and a guf and a regel, it wouldn't have where to implement. You couldn't write a letter Aleph just because you have chai misnaneh. You have to have fingers, and you have to have the koyach of writing, you have to have arms. So in other words, it all originates from the general power of movement, but then it's implemented through the specific faculties. Ubehechrech hadavar, another hechrech hadavar, and you must say, hechrech hadavar means, he doesn't say behechrech lemer. So hechrech hadavar means, in this subject matter, you have to say, shaloi kol hakeach kulei, okay, next point. That not all the potential of movement in the koyach emerges from the klali prati. In other words, the fact that you have the power to write in your hands does not mean that all of it is expressed, all that power is expressed in your actual specific movement. When you write an aleph, there's a lot of tzimtzum here. You're not writing everything you can write. The koyach haksiva, in other words, encompasses a lot more than the specific movement that you're making right now. So if someone says, I'm going to now, let's say, walk a few inches, Is that your koyach ha'alicha? No, it's a specific element of the koyach ha'alicha. In other words, it's like you have a great potential, and you're drawing out one specific thing. That's what he's saying now. You have to say, not the entire faculty, let's say the faculty of writing or walking. The way it emerges from the general specific faculty. We're meaning now not the hiyuli. We're talking about the general would be, let's say, koyach haklali of movement of your body or of your arms. That not all of it comes in a revealed way in the specific movement that you are right now activating. The hainu, which means the gam achle asese hatnua, that even after you make that movement, whatever the movement may be, nishma'at mashalei b'pel. Something remains. He says ma'at, meaning some little remains which do not come actualized. I'm not sure why he says ma'at. It could be quite more than ma'at. Ma'at means a little. But basically he's saying that even if you expressed yourself in a particular movement, does not mean that all of the koyach was expressed. Yeah. So if you walk, for example, 5 feet, that's obviously not all your power to walk. You can walk 5 miles, hypothetically. Or you write a letter aleph or beis, that's not, you could also write a book. So not the whole koyach haksiva in the yadayim or the koyach hatnu b'yadayim was used. Again, I'm not sure why he says nishan ma'at mashalei bo b'peil. Maybe here doesn't mean ma'at as little, but he means that something remains. More like ma'at as in something, not as opposed to little. I would say actually more remains not actualized than actualized. But that's the word he uses here. It's not over yet. He continues, Hine, now. When he rests from whatever work or activity he was doing, the expression or the extension of the power of movement, hanishar, shaloi bo lepeil, hariyuchezu lekeche haprati haklali. Now I'm thinking he may mean not the actual potential in writing. Maybe he means, I'm just thinking out loud. I think he means something different. I think he means when you, for example, prepare to write something, let's say you're going to write a letter, short letter, long letter, doesn't matter. So you start writing Aleph Beis, you start writing the words, Baruch Hashem, Beis Reish Vav Ches. So you've allocated resources in your arm that you're going to write now. You have enough, just like you have enough, you're using enough ink. You know how much power of movement you're going to use. So he's saying, even when you actually use it, something still remains in reserve that you haven't used. I think that's what he means. So I'm correcting myself. Before I said that the potential, you can write a whole book. That's not what he's saying, I think. I think he's saying that even when you are, let's say I'm going to now exert myself to walk a mile. So he says, when you're walking that mile, there's always something still in reserve that's why he calls it ma'at. Something that you didn't use. You didn't use all your energy necessarily. So now he says, so when you rest, when you stop and rest, what happens? He says that part of the power, shalei ba b'peil, that part in the reserve that did not come into actuality, it returns, because while you're walking, you're still accessing so-called the fuel, the energy of your investment here to walk. I'm just using walking as an example. It could be writing, whatever it may be. When you stop and rest, he says, that reserve returns back into that original potential of the power of movement of that particular part of the body. Hine oz nasa echad. That's when it becomes one. Leah says, Sardus, Zu Hare'ena. You know what? Being that it's already late here, let me stop here. He's now going to go back to what means echad and yachid. It's interesting, the example, from my point of view, I mean, this may sound a little chutzpahdik. To me, the example is more complicated than the nimshal. But clearly, the Frierdiker Rebbe is giving it to us, so we have to break our heads to figure it out. But he's going to use this now to explain echad of pratim and yachid. That's what it looks like he's going back to. But I believe this is also an example that will help us understand Oyer, the highest level of Oyer as it's encompassed in the source, which is like Hiyuli in a way. And then as Oyer comes out into a koyach klali prati and then into a koyach prati. That's my guess. I may be wrong. But right now, he's going to go back to Agdus. So let's stop here at the bottom of page 162. And what we essentially learned is a long mushal here on how the faculties work, how they originate in the very potential state. They then manifest in a klali prati, a general but specific part of the body, part of movement, let's say in the case of tenua, movement. That in turn informs a specific form of movement like writing, and that in turn has writing as the details. And they all, one level originates from the previous level, all the way back, and now he's going to conclude this muscle and bring it back to us. So we'll learn the end tomorrow. We'll go deeper into what we're up to, but that's where he reviewed right now. So we'll stop here at the bottom of 162, and we'll get